All right, everyone. Welcome back as we continue in our exploration of justice, happiness, and the meaning of life. This is our third class on this marvelous topic. We started off in the first day. Does this seem too loud? No? Okay. It does? A little bit. I don't think that's going to make much difference. We'll see. We started off our first class with the great challenge to justice, asking ourselves if we could get away with injustice, would we do it? And if so, why would we do it? So we imagined an invisibility ring, which would make us beyond the touch of the law. And the question is then, when you steal that money from the bank? Remember, we divided ourselves up, and we thought, would we do this? And some of you said, yeah, probably. And some of you are like, no, I don't think so. And the ones that said, yeah, I might do that, the assumption was that this act of injustice would actually make you happy. Otherwise, why would you bother with the money, right? Money gets you all the things money can buy, which is a lot of things. And if those things make you happy, then it might make sense to go ahead and engage in a little bit of criminality, so long as, of course, you can't get caught. On the other hand, we had some of you like, no, I don't think I'm going to steal that money. You can give me an invisibility ring, I'll just give it back to you. I don't need it. And so you said, I'm going to go to the other side of the room. I'm not going to do this. But then we put all the penalties of injustice, remember we detached it from the unjust man and we put it on the just man. And we took all the rewards of justice and we stuck that on the unjust man with our scenario. And then we asked you, is it worth it? If you're on the rack being tortured and you've lost your reputation and you've lost your wealth and you've lost your status in life and you've lost all your friends who think you're a criminal and now you're in prison waiting for your horrifying execution, is it worth it? Right? Is justice enough for happiness? So last class, part 2, we asked the first question, is justice necessary for happiness? And again, by justice, we're not talking about criminal justice or some sort of corporate social order, right? We're talking about the justice of an individual person, the individual man. Are you a morally good person? Are you a righteous person? And is that quality necessary for human happiness? And so last class we said, well, to figure this out, we need to know what happiness is. And clearly it's not merely a feeling, right? Clearly it's not relative to every individual. Remember my example of jumping over the line and you thought that you could impose your happiness values on me and suggest that I'm crazy for thinking that line crossing counts as being happy. And I confess that you're entirely correct. And you should impose your happiness values on me because, of course, you're not imposing anything, right? Reality is what it is. And we don't get to change it simply because we want it to be different. So I may wish that I was happy by crossing lines, but happiness is the greatest thing ever. And the idea that by crossing a line I'm going to be happy is ludicrous. So it is reality that imposes what it is on us. That's the imposition. And frankly, it's not an imposition, right? When you're eating a big juicy steak, do you say, oh, this steak, it's imposing its amazing texture and flavor on me? No, you're like, no, this is delicious. Impose all you want. I shall also be imposed upon by wine, and I shall be imposed upon by ice cream, right? This is not imposition. Truth and reality do not impose. They liberate us to our fulfillment. So, we found out then that happiness, right, is the good of the human being. We then said, what does it mean to be human? And we found out it is, of course, to be rational animals. And so we have to be good or complete in our full rationality and in our animality. We're not rabbits, and so the sort of happiness that's appropriate to rabbits is not appropriate to us. On the other hand, we are also not angels. So the sort of happiness that's appropriate to a pure spirit would not be appropriate to us. We are hybrids, composed of two kinds of stuff, matter and spirit, and therefore what satisfies us has to be the rational animal ordering of both parts. The science or art that pertains to our animal side we called health. Right? And we said if we're going to be happy people, it would be useful for us to be healthy. And then with respect to our rational part, we noticed the part that pursues the truth, which is our intellect. And of course, we need a set of virtues or habits of mind that conduce toward helping us form true beliefs. And we notice there's a virtue that does that, and of course, that's the virtue of wisdom. And then we notice, corresponding to that, there's a part of us that chooses and behaves and acts. That part seeks what's good. And of course, that also needs a virtue. And what virtue is that? The virtue of justice. And then we need to sort of bring it all together with our animal side to sort of get our desires appropriately ordered, keeping them from getting too much out of hand. And so we need a virtue called moderation to moderate and make sure it doesn't do too much. But then sometimes our desires get in the way to stop us from doing what we ought to do, right? I would rather run away than stand my ground and defend my fellow troops in battle. And so we need a virtue for that, and we call that courage. And lo and behold, we find the famous 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, moderation, and courage, which it turns out are the satisfaction of human nature. And so we come to the ancient doctrine that virtue, including justice, but now it's wider, is happiness. So, question: can you be happy without being just? No. You can get everything that you ever wanted, and you will not be happy. Why? Because happiness is the good of the whole human being, not merely a part. If you only satisfy desire and you're more than desires, you're never going to be happy. Again, if you were just a cow and all you did all day long is munch grass, you might be perfectly satisfied. But you're not a cow, you're not a rabbit, you're not an angel, you are a human being. And you have additional elements that must be fulfilled in order for you to be complete. You must fulfill the intellect, you must fulfill aspiration, you must fulfill your choosing faculty. And therefore, you must have all the virtues, including justice, wisdom, moderation, and courage, or you will never be happy. So happiness has never been getting everything you want. This is the big lie, right? At the end of the first Willy Wonka movie, the crazy guy says to the boy, happiness is having your dreams come true. Not true. Not true. What if you have the wrong dreams? Serial killers have all kinds of dreams. Does that make them happy? No. Right? And getting what you want doesn't work. Whenever you get what you want, you always want more. Remember the Christmas list example? So that doesn't work. Happiness requires justice. But our concern for today is justice enough? Is it really the case that virtue is happiness? Is it sufficient for happiness? And that's the question we want to ask today. Because we can think of lots of people who are very virtuous, and they seem to find themselves in the midst of great suffering. And you think to yourself, well, he's very virtuous, but he's not happy. In fact, you might also argue that virtue necessitates, it lands you in suffering. So how is that compatible? So how do we work this out? That's the concern for today. And so I asked you if you would be so kind as to bring your Bibles along. Or, of course, if you have your cell phones, you know that the Bible is stuffed in your cell phone too. Right? Somewhere in the World Wide Web, you should be able to get some access. And take a look with me, if you want, or I'll just read along, in Romans chapter 8. If you're not good with the Bible, open up to sort of the last 2/3. You'll find the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, then the book of Acts, and then the book of Romans. Or if you have your cell phone, just put in the search, Romans 8, and you'll find what you want. Okay, Romans 8. So listen to this, what St. Paul says. Chapter 8, verse 18. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. The sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing the glory that's to come. Now that is something else to say. Right? Think about the sufferings that you've had in your life. Think about the trouble that you've seen in other people's lives. Think about all the times you've heard someone say, I would believe in God except that, and they give you some instance of horrible suffering that they experienced, or very much more often it's they heard about someone else experienced. And they're like, what kind of God would allow that to happen? And so rather than suffering being an impetus to believe, suffering turns out to be a reason not to believe, because it seems like suffering wins. Look what St. Paul just said. The sufferings are not even worthy to be compared to the glory. This is a pretty audacious claim, right? What can he mean here? Naturally, you would say, if only we knew what glory was, then we might know what he's talking about. I agree with you. Let's find out what glory is. So back up a couple of books. If you have pages, you can go back Acts and then back to St. John. If you're in your search, just look up St. John's Gospel and chapter 17. And here we have an inside view of exactly how glory is understood by Jesus. You'll remember in that Garden of Gethsemane prayer where he says, I don't want this cup. If it can pass by me, let it happen. Well, he was praying many other things in that night. And John 17 is one of his complete prayers. So it's extremely insightful. And Jesus starts talking about glory. Let's see what he says. Here he's talking to God. He says, he lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you, since you have given him power over all flesh to give eternal life to all whom you have given him. And this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. I glorified you on earth, having accomplished the work which you gave me to do. And now, Father, glorify me in your own presence, with the glory which I had with you before the world was made. So this is intriguing, right? Here Jesus is about to die, and he is obsessed with this topic of glory. Did you ever notice that before? What is going on? And apparently this glory is something that he had back in the day when he was the second person of the Trinity only, right? And then apparently he set that aside to become the baby, as the Son of God is the Son of Man, Jesus. And now he's saying, I really want that back. And he says, I did the work that you asked me to do. And then jump down to line 20, 21 and 22. He says, I do not pray for these only, but also for those who believe in me through their word, that they meaning the apostles, that they who believe meaning us, that they all may be one, even as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they may also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory which you have given me, I have given to them. So now it gets even deeper. What is going on here? What is this talking about? And there's a bit of a conundrum almost, right? Because when you think of who God is, you say, well, God is love. And of course, you'd be right to say that. Except this isn't talking about love. Jesus isn't talking about that at all. He's talking about glory. So we might have gone from one conundrum to a deeper conundrum, right? We wanted to know what glory is to understand how it's possible that glory could overwhelm suffering. And we tried to figure that out by figuring out how Jesus understands glory. And now it's led us into a conundrum about whether God is love or God is glory, or what does it all mean? So to get at this, let's start with love and then work our way back. Right? What does it mean to love another person? Well, if you said I love you and you try to undermine and harm that person, we would say that you're a liar. You're not telling the truth. You don't truly love that person. So whatever love is, it doesn't allow you to do wicked, hurtful things to the person you say you love. Thus, love must seek the good for its object. Right? And so if you think about the definition of love, you'd say, yeah, love is seeking the good for the other. All right. Then how is it possible to love God? Does God need anything? Do we not say in theology that God is his own good? He is the infinite good. He is the perfect good. So is it even possible to love God? How do you seek the good for God? The hole gets deeper. Every time we turn a rock, we have to go deeper still. What can this mean? Well, I'm thinking of an example that might help us. You know about these marathon runners or these 5K runners if marathons are too far? Right? They get out there and they begin to run. And let's suppose you're not the runner, but you're the runner's friend. And you come along and you cheer them on. Hooray, hooray, right? And then as they take off, you jump in your car or your bicycle and you zip to the next part up. And then they show up and you're like, hooray, hooray, and you give them water. Then you jump in your car and you keep going. You use the car, they're on the pavement. Isn't this an excellent system? Yeah. In fact, you might think, add them to your car, it would shorten the trip. But no, we don't do that. The whole time, though, you are wishing them to achieve a great good, right? To win the race, or maybe just to finish the race. For many of us, finishing is the key. Forget about winning. Those are for those super experts. For the rest of us, if you run the 5K, you're like, I did it. I actually managed to keep moving for 5 entire kilometers. Or you say, oh, I'm going to try the 10K now. Right? And you say to your friend, okay, that's great. Go for the 10K. I think you can do it. Thank God that's not me, right? Run, go for it. And then finally they get up to the full marathon. And you're cheering them on. And it is a good they have not yet achieved. Do you agree? So you're loving them. You're seeking the good for them. The victory that will be had only once they cross the finish line. So let's suppose your friend finally does it. Runs an entire marathon and finishes. At that point, you can't seek the good for them anymore, can you? They did it. So I guess that's it. Love's over. Right? Is that what happens? Do you give up and drive home alone? What do you do when they get to the finish line? Depends on the length of the race. If it's a marathon, you pick them up and put them in the car and you take them home and you nurture them and their wounds, right? But if it's a 5K, you did it. You actually ran. You accomplished the mission. You exult not in a good to be achieved, but in a good that has been achieved. You see the difference? And what we call this in the old language is glorification. You have achieved the results and you exult in your victory, and we recognize and glorify you for your championship. We just had those Olympics. These are the ultimate champions. We raise them up on pedestals, right? Who do you put on a pedestal? A hero, right? A big statue of George Washington, or one of the ancient gods. That's pretty high up to be elevated to the level of a god, right? Well, you take these people with those gold medals, they are the highest. And they are worthy of the glory, adoration, and exaltation, and the pride that we have in them for their incredible accomplishment. But it's no longer seeking a good that is yet to be. It is exulting in a good that has finally been accomplished. And that tells us then that there's two kinds of love. There's the love for what is not yet, that's cheering them on in the race. Don't give up. Keep going. The good that is yet to be achieved. But then there's the love for what is, what has been accomplished. So glorification then is what? A kind of love. So what is Jesus talking about in the garden? Father, love me in the way that we had back in the day, before I came down to earth. The full deal. Infinite glory to infinite glory. It's been about 33 years. I'm itching for a return. I did everything that you wanted me to do. Now I want back into that absolute infinite intimacy between the Father and the Son. Does that make sense to our ears? Yeah. So he is talking about love, isn't he? Yes, he is. And he said, and I have given to them, us, that glory. So when St. Paul says, the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us, what is he talking about? Infinite, divine love. That's what he's talking about. Now let's get a sense of this. Let's graph it out for us. Let's make ourselves a scale. Suffering. And now let's put not just our personal suffering, but all of it. All of it that the entire world has endured. St. Paul is saying not only that glory outweighs the suffering, he's saying you can't even make the comparison. How much glory would you need to combat the kind of suffering that we've seen in our world? This much? More? To the ceiling? Do you think glory stuffed in this room would be enough? Mm-mm. Right? You know the answer. This world is so dark, so horrific. Just the 20th century, the century of blood, that's what I call it. Right? Look what human beings did to each other. There's only one amount of suffering that could possibly do it. Infinite. If it were infinite, it would break the scale, wouldn't it? Then Paul's words would make sense. It cannot be compared. Infinite love, that would do it. That's what Paul's talking about. The sufferings of this present time, back to Romans 8, are not worthy to be compared with the infinite love of God, which he intends to pour out into us. Let's go on and see what he says. For the creation, that's the whole creation, waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God in that glory, because the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of him who subjected it, in hope, because the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay, and it will obtain the glorious liberty of the children of God. We know the whole creation has been groaning with labor pains together until now. Not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. So here's what St. Paul is saying. This entire world is the womb. It's all labor pains. Now think back to when you were in the womb. At first, it was a delightful experience, right? You had a wonderful medium of warmth. You had this nice constant beat, boom, 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 music. You were getting ready, right? You didn't need to worry about feeding, breathing, and you could swim, do flips. I won't illustrate that for you right now, being in the wrong medium, okay? It was a great experience. And then, at some point, you begin to notice, a little too cozy in here, right? Getting a little cramped. And you might have wondered, what are these things for? That's weird. And what's this thing? Right? What do I need this for? My belly button is doing a great job. All the fuel I need. And then one day, things really got bad. Right? Suddenly, you were in agonizing pain. You felt cramped and pushed and shoved down a channel. And your head was like elongated, crammed down. You're like, this sucks. See, we always talk about labor pains from the standpoint of the woman. What about labor pains from the standpoint of the kid? The whole creation is in labor pains, right? And then all of a sudden, bang, you popped out into this world. And suddenly, what eyes were made for made sense. What aromas were, what the nose was for, all of a sudden you smelled the air and you breathed and you're like, oh, this is what it's all been for the whole time. And then you tasted your mother's milk and you're like, oh, this is good, right? And at some point you moved up to Cheerios and vanilla wafers, and someday you got ice cream. And you were like, I prefer to be outside the womb. Nice. But when you were inside the womb, you couldn't fully anticipate. All you could do is imagine using the resources that you had. You might have said, this thing is interesting, I wonder what it does. But you couldn't fully grasp. You knew there was something, a point. But what was it really for? That's what St. Paul is telling us. Our lives here are an image of what is to come. Our lives here are in shadow for the full reality that is in fact coming. God does not intend to trick or deceive you. He does not intend to set you up with these deep longings for fulfillment and then cut the legs out from under you. He is not a cosmic genie playing a joke on us. God intends to absolutely and infinitely fulfill every single aspect of who He created you to be. He has to. Otherwise, this doesn't work. Think about the deepest, most painful things that you have gone through as a human being. What would it take to fix that? Say, well, I think I'm going to need some memory erasure. Okay. Do you think omnipotent power can do that? Yes. Say, well, I lost a child. Do you think God could give you your child back as a child? And you and your husband could rear him together on a beautiful mountain somewhere for 20 years? Would that do it? Like, we're getting somewhere now. Is that too hard for God? See, the problem is, we are afraid to believe it. We've got this mystical pie-in-the-sky conception of heaven that we use to say that then it won't matter anymore. Oh, on the contrary, it will matter. It will always matter because it matters right now. God is not going to simply dismiss your concerns. He intends to fulfill them. You see the difference? Infinite glory, infinite love to completely overwhelm all of the suffering in such a way that when you are out of the womb, when you get through to the other side and are resurrected and completed as a human being, you will be, ready? Happy. Happy as a human being, not as a ghost. You do realize that human destiny is not to be in heaven. Have you been looking forward to going to heaven? Think again. That's not what the ancient texts tell us. What is human destiny? St. Peter says, at the end of all time, all of the heavens and the planets and the earth will be devoured with infinite fire. Whoosh, sizzle, sizzle, gone. Then God is going to recreate the heavens and the earth. And what kind of beings live on a planet? Creatures with legs. Notice, you're not meant to float. You are not an angel. Your happiness is what kind of happiness? Human happiness. So God intends to put you on a planet called Earth. The fulfillment of this one and all the good. Every good thing from this world completed there. So that you are physically, totally fulfilled with all the elements of human life that you expect. How else can you be happy? 8, what does that mean? I have 8 minutes left? 8 minutes left to finish all of this, huh?
10:35.
Right, 10:35. Okay. Here's the way we say it. God completes human nature, just as he completes all the other natures. All those animal natures he just talked about, which are also waiting eagerly for our redemption. We were meant to be the kings and queens of this realm. We screwed it up good. But eventually, that majesty and kingship will be ours. And then all the creatures will be swept up in that. You know this silly question people say, will pets go to heaven? What kind of a dumb question is that? Is the pet a part of what is necessary to complete your good? Did you love your pet? I said, well, of course I love my pet. Then of course your pet will be with you in the next world. Everything that is necessary to complete who you are will be there, or something better. See, the trouble is we just don't dare to believe this. We are so afraid of being disappointed that we concoct some ghostly realm and call that heaven. And somehow we think, well, we'll just, we'll sing and that'll be enough. Hey, if you're in the choir, maybe that's enough. If you're a composer, maybe that works for you. But what if you like to fish? How big are the bass in heaven? Pretty damn big. Because it's not just spiritual realm, right? It's rivers filled with great big fish. I mean, what do you want? You say, well, I kind of always wanted to go visit Narnia. Okay, fine. Do you think God can't create Narnia? Do you think it doesn't already exist? Where do you think C.S. Lewis is right now? Like, I'm beginning to catch on. Yeah. Use your imagination. God gave you your imagination. He gave you your imagination to fulfill it. He's not in the business of disappointing us. He made human nature for a reason. So good did he make human nature, he took it on himself. And then he ascended into heaven as what? A human being? And he promised he will come back as what? A human being. He's going to stay human. Which means, who's going to be on that planet with us when we have it all reset and start it again? The king. He'll be there. Human destiny is meant to be fulfilling. Now I ask you, if God does all of that, do you think that might be able to overcome suffering? Now, here's the question. Why can't we just fast forward to the end? That's a very good question. And Paul goes on. Let's see what he says next. For in this hope we were saved. This is what this is about. This is what Catholicism is for. What is religion for? To turn human beings into the kings and queens they were meant to be. That's what it's for. In this hope, this glory, we have been saved. But hope that is seen is not hope. Who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Uh-oh. Now I'm beginning to catch on to what's going on. Patience. If you don't see and you believe, and you allow this hope to infuse your life with the color and three-dimensionality of what the faith truly is, a fully human satisfying thing, then what's going to happen to you? You are going to be transformed by that hope, aren't you? You are going to be transformed from faith through hope to what? Love. And patience, of course, is as everyone knows, a virtue. So, what are virtues for? Why does God leave us in this world with all this trouble, all this struggle? Because suffering and trouble and difficulty is the cauldron of the formation of virtue. Remember, it's not enough that virtue be in your desire. It has to be melded into who you are all the way down. How does virtue really get into us? It's when it's hard. It's when we hold the line, when it's hard and it's tough, and we don't give up. And if you think about the things in your life that helped make you the person you are today, you're going to go back to some of the hardest, most difficult times. right? And you endured. That's what patience is. Patience is endurance. The struggle, holding fast. And then those virtues start to grow within you. They become magnificent, and they transform you into people filled with love. Not just for God, but for your neighbor. For you can't love God if you don't love your neighbor. This is what virtues are for. St. Augustine said it this way: virtues are not such liars as to profess to protect men from the miseries of this life. Virtue is not enough for happiness. Our question on the other board, it's not enough. But virtue fits you for happiness. Because virtue makes you a person fitted to be ready for the love of God. And until we become people fitted for Him, it won't do us any good to see Him. In fact, you can't see Him unless you truly love what He is. And what is He? As we just saw, infinite love, infinite goodness. And if we don't love goodness, we want nothing to do with God, believe you me. You don't want to get anywhere near God. You will sizzle. So in this world, what are we in here for? To learn to love that goodness with every element of who and what we are. And look what he then says, St. Paul, moving on, jumping down to line 28. We know that in everything God works for the good with those who love Him, who are called according to His purpose. Now don't misunderstand that. St. Paul did not say that God causes everything in your life. He absolutely does not cause the horrifying things that happen to you. That's what criminals have chosen to do. That's what the world, with its random bizarreness, when the meteor didn't hit anyone else and came through your window and hit you in the head. The world is subject to all this futility and frustration and distortion. God doesn't cause all that. But here's what He does do. He causes all things to work toward the good through all of that. See the difference? If we love Him. So here's what he's saying. This infinite glory, I am making this present within you in participation, in start right now. I am preparing and fitting you for this. And everything that you go through in your life, you keep choosing virtue. You choose justice. You choose wisdom. You choose courage. You choose moderation. And from the top of your being to the bottom, you will be infused with virtue. And then on top of that, I'm going to pour out my Spirit, and I'm going to give you 3 additional virtues. Right? And you, of course, as good Catholics, we know what those are. First virtue is baptism. What is that called? Starts with an F, and the next 4 letters are A-I-T-H. Oh yeah, faith, of course, obviously, faith. Just, seeing if you really knew Dr. Tiel. Second great theological virtue after faith is hope, which we just talked about. Third great theological virtue is love. So, what are virtues for? To fit us, to make us complete, to be the right sorts of people fitted to become lovers of God. And that is why we are allowed to be stuck in this world. And that is why we go through so much struggle, and God lets it happen. Because He's after your real good. And your real good is not the escape of pain. He is your real good. And He knows that. And so, He was going to help you get there. You say, well, that might mean we have to go through a lot of misery. Yeah, that's right. And when you choose to love people around you, you're only increasing the amount of pain in your life. A lot of you look like your grandparents. Is what I say not true? Did having your children grow up, was that it? They're done now? You're like, oh, my children, the things they do. And then there's their children. It's a whole clan I got to be responsible for. Right. The more you love, the more you suffer. Because there's so many people. Fine. Right? Bring it on. That process is transforming you into a saint. What is a saint anyway? It's a person who loves. That's it. That's what saints are. And every one of you is becoming a saint, so long as you keep choosing love when all this other stuff is thrown at you. If you endure to the end, you are transformed through this virtue, and then that glory will be fulfilled in you. All right, that's it for today. Next week, we bring it all together in our final class, and we will look at the question of what then is the meaning of life. And I'll bet you already have a few ideas. All right, see you next time.